Welcome back to the Barrel Talk Podcast. We are back with another episode of Let's Talk About It. In today's episode, trade season is officially over with. The trade deadline has passed about a couple hours ago. We're just going to run down through all the trades, talk about if they're a positive for a team or a negative, if they're a W or not. And then we're going to talk about some buyout market players and where I think they should end up. And then we can wrap the episode up with some disappointing teams at this year's deadline. Teams who maybe made the wrong move or didn't make a move at all. But to start out, Xavier Tillman to Boston. Obviously a W for Boston. They've kind of been lacking a big outside of Kristaps Porzingis that can give them consistent production. And I feel like this Boston team kind of lacks, I guess, toughness in a way. Because Xavier Tillman is kind of a bruiser, undersized big, but he's very versatile, can really switch onto guards on pick and rolls very well. And he kind of fits what they want to do because Kristaps Porzingis he's the X factor for this team. And I feel like his health is the number one priority because I feel like they're a completely different team when he plays compared to when he's not. And there's going to be a lot of games Kristaps Porzingis just isn't healthy or isn't playing. Xavier Tillman can fill that center spot really nicely because he fits what they want to do. And he's very athletic, can get up and down. He's a lob threat. So I think he is a great fit for Boston. And on the Memphis side, because they also made a trade with Steven Adams and getting him out of there, who was missing the entire season with the injury. And they just moved on from Xavier Tillman. This is a very interesting time for the Memphis Grizzlies because they are really figuring out what pieces are going to be on this team long term. I feel like if you were going to have any year to have all these injuries and kind of be bad and get a lottery pick, it's this year. Because I'm not saying the draft class is like super loaded or anything like that, but looking at it in the mindset of who is good right now out west, like the Clippers are hot right now, Denver's really good, OKC's really good, Minnesota's really good, and then you got teams like the Lakers, Pelicans on the back end of the play-in, and the Suns, who could still probably beat the Memphis Grizzlies if they were fully healthy this year, and they already started out from behind with John Morant's suspension, then he gets hurt, then Desmond Bane gets hurt, and it's really just Triple J, and then a couple G League role guys. So, and then looking at what I think they are building, getting some draft capital. Obviously, you're getting 2 second-round picks, even though those aren't going to be super beneficial to you. In terms of trade, those are trade assets for this team. I think this team is priming and getting assets ready for a bigger move this offseason, which I think is definitely needed, especially to compete out west in the next coming years, because you got a lot of young teams that ain't going nowhere. And Memphis could be one of them young teams that ain't going nowhere. This could just be a short kind of retool year, kind of what happened to Golden State before the year before they won the chip, where they were super up and down, dealt with injuries and everything else, and kind of got back to winning basketball the years after that. But this is going to be a very beneficial year for the Grizzlies because it's going to give them time to reflect on who's going to be part of the core going long term. Another trade, Monte Morris to the Wolves, super big W. A lot of people were linking up Tyus Jones going back to Minnesota, but Monte Morris, I feel like they really got him for cheap because of his injury this year. But because I think Monte Morris is still a top 3, maybe even the best backup guard in the league, because his turnover to assist ratio is elite on Denver. And he kind of went to Detroit, he got hurt, he just came back like last week. And then you give up Shake Milton, Troy Brown Jr., and a second to the Pistons. I mean, Pistons had no real need for him. And then they're probably, like Shake Milton and Troy Brown probably won't even be on the Pistons after this year anyways. And they pick up a second out of the deal for somebody who hasn't even played for them all year, basically. So big W for the Wolves. I feel like they needed another guard outside of Mike Conley who can really run the show. And I think Monte Morris is a perfect guy for that. Next trade, we got 2 trades here that I'm going to really put into one because this is very confusing. I feel like a team got better, then they immediately just got worse. Talking about the 76ers. So 76ers get Buddy Hield for Marcus Morris, Korkmaz, and 3 seconds to the Pacers. Buddy Hield finally gets traded. I feel like he's been in trade rumors for the past couple of years now. Then you're looking at their next trade of the day, which is Pat Bev to the Bucks in return for his campaign. The first trade was a W. You're getting one of the best shooters in the league. And then you turn around and give, honestly, your best perimeter defender to one of the teams you're going to have to beat to go to the finals probably. You give them to the Bucks, who are at a desperate need for defense and toughness right now at the guard spot. I'm not saying Pat Bev is like make or break championship kind of player. Pat Bev has an impact. He might have all the antics and everything else, but he has an impact. He's one of the best perimeter guards when it comes to defending other teams' best players, bigger players. He's been successful out of his whole career. And you're going to give him to the Bucks, who are struggling defensively? For campaign? You just, objectively, you got worse in terms of backup role player. Because Pat Bev's going to go over there and start. If I'm Milwaukee, I'm sitting here. We need defense now. I'm putting Pat Bev on my 1 or 2, having him and Dame in my backcourt, Middleton, Giannis, Brook Lopez. Pat Bev changes what this team wants to do defensively because of how good of a defender he is. And he also brings a ton of toughness to this team. He has so much playoff experience that he can bring to this team. And now it's to the point where I'm like, why would Philly even do that in the first place? Because I liked Pat Bev with the Sixers. I think him and DeAnthony Melton, when they needed defense the most and they wanted to play small, 2 perfect guys you could play small within your backcourt. I don't understand really the need to go give up Pat Bev for a campaign, because my mindset was when I saw this trade, it was going to be a bigger move coming for Philly, and it never did. When I saw this trade, I was like, man, they might be like trying to take a swing at like the DeJounte Murray or DeRozan or something like that. But they stayed pat for the rest of the day, and I'm like, you add Buddy Hield, but you get rid of your best perimeter defender. I'm like, where does that all make sense? Where does that all add up? And especially when you just are getting a team in your conference better who has title aspirations in the Bucks. So, very confusing. I think they obviously came up with the Buddy Hield trade, but then I think they kind of took a little step down with the Patrick Beverley trade. Next trade, Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji to Toronto, which I think is a W for Toronto because they're kind of using Agbaji as kind of that OG replacement, and he's still super young. People were tripping on Twitter about maybe a first is too much, but you already have young talent on the team. Here's the thing about draft picks, in my opinion. I think draft picks can be very overthought because when you're looking at a team that really already has a ton of young talent in Toronto, and a Quickly, Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett, and then you add Agbaji, who was a lottery pick from the Jazz. I mean, giving up a first for this year and a not really loaded draft class, I'm fine with that, especially when Agbaji isn't even projected to be a buzz. Utah just had so many younger kind of tweener guys that needed minutes. Agbaji kind of fell off into the fold and all of that. And then you get Kelly Olynyk, who honestly fits what they want to do. Gives them spacing on a team that struggles to shoot the ball at the 5 spot, something they really haven't had since they won the chip. A 5 that can really space the floor. Next to Scotty Barnes, I think it's great. And Agbaji, I feel like he can grow in Toronto with all the other young talent. And then for the Jazz, you just pick up a first. Danny Ainge loves his draft capital and his draft assets. You pick up a first here. Otto Porter is probably not going to be on your roster after this year. Kira Lewis Jr., still a project player. I feel like Utah has done a great job with making some of these, I wouldn't say bust, but people that haven't played up to their potential, give them a spot and an opportunity to play. And I feel like you've seen a guy like Colin Sexton really kind of turn his career around a little bit, because he was a big one where I felt like Cleveland kind of writ him off. He was just kind of a throw-in for the D-Mitch trade. He had his injuries in Cleveland, mind you, but I feel like Colin Sexton always had more potential and more to show out of his game. And I feel like he's getting that opportunity. Kira Lewis Jr. went from the Pelicans to Toronto. Now he's going to be with the Jazz. And I think he's probably going to get an opportunity to play. Jazz, W. Toronto, W. Next trade. Gordon Hayward to the Thunder. I would say I really like this trade because you basically gave him nothing for him. Gave Davis Bertans and Trey Mann. I think Trey Mann has a ton of potential. It's just OKC has so much young talent over there and so many guys that need to play over him, to where it sucks that it's Charlotte, because I've given up really all hope in Charlotte until they just completely just clean house. The only bright spot out of there right now is Brandon Miller, who's been hooping. But Trey Mann, he should easily get playing time on this team because there shouldn't be anybody over here playing over Trey Mann. Give him an opportunity. He has talent. He has potential. Give him an opportunity. It just didn't work out in OKC because they have so much going on over there. And then Davis Bertans, I mean, he just bounces from team to team. His contract is basically salary filler at this point. But Gordon Hayward to the Thunder. This just gives them another weapon. I think this is a great move. Gordon Hayward is somebody who can do a little bit of everything. He could be versatile, play the really 2, 3, or 4, depending on what lineups they're out there using. He's another person who is great with the ball in his hands, especially in the pick and roll. He can shoot the ball. He can defend a little bit. He's just that Swiss Army knife. And I think he's just going to give you, not defensively, but a little bit more offensively and be more versatile than a Lou Dort, who you still have is probably going to come off the bench. But I do like the pickup of Gordon Hayward because he's somebody who has playoff experience. He's somebody he's more of a vet. He's more seasoned. And I think people always forget about Gordon Hayward's talent because he's in Charlotte or he's hurt or something like that. But if Gordon Hayward stays healthy, this is a great pickup for OKC. Phenomenal pickup. He's somebody who can do a little bit of everything. Somebody who I think they needed and kind of fits what they want to do. He doesn't take away from SGA or Chet. He kind of more so adds to that because he's such a good shooter. He provides more spacing. He's somebody that's good with the ball in his hands, like I said. But big W for the Thunder. Huge W for the Thunder. Next trade. Here's the big one. New York gets Bojan Bogdanovic, Alec Burks to the Knicks. Quentin Grimes, Evan Fournier, Malachi Flynn, 2 seconds goes to the Pistons. Alright. I'm going to say this here first. I had, in the previous episode of the Barrel Talk podcast, I had the Knicks kind of being borderline on that outskirt edge of contenders. I loved what Jalen Brunson's been doing this year. I think Julius Randle's been having a very underrated season as well. As much hate as Julius Randle does get to his name. With what they've been given to get OG, and that OG pickup has been doing wonders for them. And then you go around and make another move. Go get Bojan, who I feel like the Pistons kind of traded too late. Felt like they should have traded him last year when his value was higher. You get 2 professional scorers, him and Alec Burks. Alec Burks already been there, played. Bojan fixed exactly what they want to do. They need some more shooting and shot creation outside of Jalen Brunson. Both of these guys give them that. You give them Quentin Grimes, who is kind of has a weird kind of feel. I feel like, because I liked him in New York, but I feel like he has so much more to offer with his game that he wasn't able to show in New York. Hopefully he gets that opportunity with the Pistons. Evan Fournier, contract filler. Malachi Flynn's interesting because I feel like because they have released Killian Hayes, there's going to be more opportunity in that guard position. I think Malachi Flynn still has potential from Toronto because he wasn't going to really ever play for the Knicks. So the Pistons getting him and 2 second-round picks for Bogey and Alec Burks. Alec Burks doesn't really have that much value anyways. Bogdanovic, I feel like they kind of traded way too late. And he could have got probably like 2 firsts or whatever the price was for him last year. But looking at it now, you get 2 young guys, Malachi Flynn, Quentin Grimes, 2 seconds, contract filler. I don't think it's that bad of a move for the Pistons, especially because the Pistons kind of need to get just better NBA talent on their roster. Because I feel like you can draft too much NBA not ready talent, and that results in you being bad, which is what they are. But W trade for New York, I feel like this pushes them into a title contender, especially out east. I would say they're the second best team out east now, especially when they get Julius Randle back. And this team is supposed to have Mitchell Robinson too with OG. So they're going to be very dangerous team out east. I would say they're the second best team in the east right now, other than Boston. I still give Boston the edge, but I think New York, with how Philly's looking, with how Milwaukee's looking, I think Cleveland's looked very good and very underrated. But I think the Knicks are just that, with the defensive caliber of the team they are, I think they're just a step right below the Celtics. I think it's the Celtics and then it's the Knicks in the top 2 teams of the East. Just because I feel like those are the 2 most complete teams right now out the East. Next trade, Daniel Gafford to the Mavs. Rashawn Holmes in a future first to Washington. Now, Daniel Gafford's going to come in and be what I feel like Rashawn Holmes was brought in to be. Be a lob threat next to Lively. And they also just brought in PJ Washington as well, which is a great pickup to get a versatile 4 that can really score and do his own thing offensively. I feel like there's going to be times where you've seen a lot of games where it's just Luka and it's just the Luka show, or it's just Kyrie and it's just the Kyrie show. Tim Hardaway Jr. has had moments as well this year, but looking at PJ Washington added to this team, I feel like he's somebody who you can play through a little bit in certain moments of the game because he is talented offensively. You had him and Gafford, and you gave up Grant Williams, Seth Curry, and a first to the Hornets. First, it might be a little too much for PJ, but I feel like the Mavs are looking at the West, and it's kind of wide open right now. I mean, there's a lot of talented teams, but you're like, Clippers have their flaws in terms of playoffs. We've seen them have their playoff downs. Then you're looking at Denver. Okay, Denver's the top dog. Are you really believers in Minnesota? you really believers in OKC yet? So I feel like, especially with Luka and Kyrie, you're adding more talent around them. And PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, who's a better fit with him and Lively in your front court. I just think this is a perfect trade because Grant Williams was great at the start of the year, and then towards like second half of the year, the middle of the season, he's kind of been bad. Seth Curry wasn't even in your rotation to begin with, and the Hornets get a first out of it, which you get a first for PJ Washington, who you were going to trade or lose anyways. That's perfectly fine. And then Rashawn Holmes, I don't really know what happened because he was a beast on Sacramento a couple years ago when they weren't that good. I don't know. I feel like ever since the Kings got good and he got out of the rotation, then gets moved again, Rashawn Holmes used to be decent. He used to be a lob threat big. I don't know. Maybe he gets the opportunity back in Washington. Next trade, Spencer Dinwiddie to Toronto, which he was bought out. This is a very questionable trade. I saw some people talk about on Twitter. This is when the 2K computers traded with each other in franchise. Kind of made sense, but breaking it down, Spencer Dinwiddie to Toronto, he gets bought out. Dennis Schroeder kind of got his spot taken by quickly in that trade earlier in the season. Dennis Schroeder and Thad Young go to the Nets. From Toronto's point of view, you buy out Spencer Dinwiddie. Then Dennis Schroeder, you get off his contract a year earlier. And it was only like 12, 13 million, but you get off it a year earlier. So you basically just open up, be like, Emmanuel Quickly, your show in terms of point guard spot. Your show. And Dennis Schroeder goes to the Nets where they got their whole just being mid thing going on over there. You buy out Spencer Dinwiddie, who's going to hit the buyout market, and he's probably easily the best player that's hit the buyout market in the past couple of seasons. So, I mean, this is kind of a whatever trade. This is kind of just Toronto getting off Dennis Schroeder's contract and then Spencer Dinwiddie hitting the buyout market. Nothing too much to say over here about it. But then Royce O'Neal, David Roddy goes to the Suns. I know it's two smaller names, but there wasn't much out here for the Suns to do in terms of their cap space flexibility. And then looking at it, Royce O'Neal fits what they want to do, fits around their stars. Same with David Roddy. They need guys who are going to do the dirty work, and I feel like David Roddy and Royce O'Neal are two guys that they didn't really have on this team in terms of how they play. These are two guys that do a lot of the dirty work. I feel like they're going to fit just fine because they can both shoot the ball next to their stars. They are versatile defenders, so I think this is a W for the Suns. 3 seconds go to the Nets. 3 seconds in salary cap filler. The Nets are kind of trying to bulk up their draft capital back up to what it was before the Big Three era. And then Utah to the Grizzlies. Grizzlies are kind of just trying everything at this point. They're trying to see who fits with that future core, like I said earlier. And then I think it's a W for the Suns because of how limited they were. Yeah, they were just super limited. I mean, they can't even really get anybody. They're one of the teams who can't sign anybody out of the buyout market. So this is a W for how limited they were in terms of making a move at the deadline. Because when I look at Twitter when it's trade deadline time, you'll see like something from every team's like, oh, do something. I'm like, what did you want the Suns to do? They didn't have no valuable players really outside of their big three, and then you got like Grayson Allen, who's been great for them this year. And then it's like nobody wants Eric Gordon. So it's like you don't have any young guys on your team that are really like teams are dying to have. You lack draft capital. So, I mean, this is a good team to kind of bulk up your role player depth for a possible deep playoff run. Then kind of the last trade, Doug McDermott back to the Pacers, just giving them more spacing and shooting. Marcus Morris in a second and Cash go to the Spurs. Marcus Morris is already on track to be bought out by the Spurs, which makes sense. Doug McDermott was really kind of barely playing on the Spurs to begin with. Doug McDermott, perfect fit with the Pacers, been there before. And then the last trade was the Pacers again. Pacers trading basically Cash to the Warriors to get Corey Joseph, who they just released at least a couple minutes ago. Pacers, I mean, they've kind of made a couple moves. I like the Pascal Siakam move. I think they're kind of charging themselves up to make the playoffs this year and then to possibly be able to move pieces and get better in the offseason. But hitting out the buyout market, like I said, Spencer Dinwiddie's probably going to be the most talented name I've seen on here in the past couple of years in terms of just buyout players who aren't like end of their career type stuff that you're going to just get on your roster for a locker room guy. There's a couple names here. Spencer Dinwiddie, obviously, the Lakers are going to be galore listed for buyout opportunities for a lot of these players. Looking at the teams, because there are teams that can't sign buyout players. Boston, Denver, Golden State, Clippers, Heat, Bucks, and the Suns are all teams that cannot sign buyout market players. So you're really taking out a good amount of contenders out of this list. But I love Spencer Dinwiddie with the Lakers. I do. I can already see the jersey edits already. But I think it's a perfect fit. They need somebody who's a bigger guard, who can defend a little bit, who can create it for himself. I think he'd be a perfect fit, complementary to D'Lo. I think he gives them another scoring option as well, next to Brown and AD. Another team that I really like, Pelicans. Pelicans were in talks, and it almost got DeJounte Murray, but I heard a report that it was going to cost them Herb Jones, which you don't trade Herb Jones. He's too elite of a defender. He fits what they do perfectly. He fits next to B.I., CJ, and Zion too well. And his three-point shot is slowly coming around. Once you get him to be an above-average three-point shooter, I mean, the two-way ability is just insane. And he's already I would say he's a top 10 perimeter defender on ball in the league right now. So, understand why he didn't do that. Pelicans, I feel like they're kind of looking for maybe that backup or starting shooting guard to fit next to CJ. I think Spencer Dinwiddie can come off the bench. He can start at the 1 or 2 offsetting CJ McCollum. But I think Spencer Dinwiddie is a great fit for what the Pelicans want to do. Next name, Joe Harris, who just got released by the Pistons out of nowhere. And he wasn't even playing. With how bad the Pistons were, Joe Harris wasn't even playing. This is one of the league's best three-point shooters. Mind you, wasn't even getting tick. It makes you think about that Monty Williams extension. It makes you think about, I don't know if he was hurt. I just know Joe Harris was not playing. And they were that bad. But looking at it, obviously, Lakers. Lakers are a top team on the buyout market because the apron doesn't affect them. So looking at what they have, they could obviously use some more shooting. Joe Harris is an elite level three-point shooter. The other team, Minnesota. When I look at Minnesota, I'm like, I think you could see problems with spacing come playoff time. Adding a shooter at the level of Joe Harris could be monumental to the Wolves making a run, especially just on the bench. And then last team, Dallas. More spacing for Luka and Kyrie. Adding Joe Harris, a knockdown shooter. And when I look at the Mavs roster, they don't have that guy because they just gave up Seth Curry. But I think Joe Harris is just a better shooter than Seth Curry, especially on the catch. But putting him out there with Luka and Kyrie, just spacing the floor, because I don't think they have a really knockdown shooter. You give it to him, that's knocked down in the corner every time just for spacing. I think Joe Harris does that perfectly. But Lakers, Wolves, and Dallas are the three teams I have for Joe Harris. Marcus Morris, who's probably going to be bought up by the Spurs. Interesting name. I got two teams. Sacramento, which I think they could use a versatile 3 to 4 off that bench. And I got the Cavs, who have been desperately looking for a defensive-minded 3 who can still put the ball on the floor and score a little bit. Marcus Morris is not the Marcus Morris of old, but looking at what he can bring to a team like the Kings or the Cavs, especially the Cavs, who are kind of dying, they've been looking for a small forward for ages, who can go out and just sign him, and he can fit it perfectly with what they want to do. Same with the Kings. I feel like the Kings have been kind of disappointing, and we'll get to that later at the deadline, because I feel like they're a team that kind of needed to make a move, in my opinion. But next guy on the list, Kyle Lowry. Love him with the Knicks. I think they could still just use a backup point guard if he does end up getting bought out, especially because they said they were going to try to flip him. Didn't think it was going to happen when he got traded to Charlotte. Now it's looking more so they're just going to buy him out because the deadline is passed. And I think the Knicks are a perfect team to go to. And then there's a couple other names like Seth Curry, Daniel House, Killian Hayes, who any young team that's kind of just like floating around out there, why not take a flyer on Killian Hayes? If you're Washington, why not? Charlotte, why not? All these teams that kind of don't really have anything set in stone for their core and their future, why not? Why not do it? Why not? Victor Oladipo was also just released by the Grizzlies. Who knows who's going to pick him up? But looking at kind of the most, I only got 3 disappointing teams. I only got 3 of them. I think it's I'm also of the mindset that people kind of grade trade deadlines, and kind of any sport has, where if you don't make a move, it was disappointing. Sometimes there ain't a move to make. Like for my team, the Warriors, what move were we going to make? I mean, we made a small move, got Corey Joseph out there, we opened up 2 roster spots, but the Warriors, there's some cases where you're just hoping your players play better. There was no need to trade Andrew Wiggins. You weren't trading Klay Thompson. You weren't trading Jonathan Kuminga after what he's been playing well. Only player on your roster where I'm like, okay, you could probably move him and you'll probably be fine. Moses Moody, but like, what's his value? He gets garbage time minutes when I think he should be in the rotation. But that's just me. So what value and what were you getting for CP3? Nothing that's going to help you right now. You might as well just keep CP3. Wait till he gets healthy. Especially for a team that ain't been healthy all year. Sometimes a lot of these teams and these fan bases of these teams are pushing for their teams to make a move and blow it up and blow it up and blow it up. Sometimes there ain't that many trades to make. There ain't moves to be made. Because as a fan's perspective, I try not to overvalue my players that I have like on my favorite team, to overvalue them to the point of, oh, this can get us this and this. With how Andrew Wiggins has been playing this year, what in God's name, who is going to trade for him? Nobody. He just had a great game against the 76ers. They're confident he can turn it around. With how Klay Thompson, how he's been playing, even with how good of a shooter he is. What team was taking a gamble on Klay Thompson? Especially when he's only played in Golden State his whole career. And what he means to that team. The Warriors would have made it so hard to just get Klay Thompson just off name value alone. And they weren't even going to trade him anyways. Like Chris Paul. What teams are going to pay $30 million for Chris Paul when he's already hurt right now and has injury problems? You weren't giving up Draymond Green because look at the extension you just gave him. So there's teams I try to look at. Like if I was a fan of that team, I try not to overvalue my players just because they're of my favorite team. But there's 3 teams that I think are disappointing for a couple of reasons. If I did more deep dive into some of these teams, some other teams that I don't have out of these 3, I could probably think of a couple more teams where like, okay, they could have made a small move here or there. But in terms of the 3 teams, Chicago Bulls, number 1. Number 1. No idea what's going on in Chicago. We have a group chat, just got it. One of my friends just sent in there. They haven't made a player acquisition since 2021 in August. What are we doing in Chicago? I don't know what's going on in Chicago. What are you holding on to? I'm sorry, that fun little first half of the season when you had Lonzo playing at a high level, Caruso in the backcourt, Lonzo, LaVine, DeRozan, MVP candidate, like, that's gone. That's been gone. Ever since Lonzo got hurt, they've been mid, and they've been mid for a while. But why are you holding on to these assets? Zach LaVine, understandable. He's hurt. He has a not friendly contract to a team. Understand why it's harder to move an asset like him, because I think Zach LaVine is still a very good player. It's just hard to move him because of his contract. He's been hurt. Teams don't know how to really value him because teams think he's not a winning player. Look at the fucking teams he's been on. I hate that term, winning player. Like, look at some of these teams before you call somebody a not winning player. But looking at like a DeMar DeRozan, well, I'm sitting here looking at Philadelphia over here, Trey Pat. I'm like, okay, maybe they doing a little something to try to get DeRozan because you don't know how long Joel Embiid's out. DeMar DeRozan is a hard player to kind of mindfully fit on some of these teams. But I think DeMar DeRozan definitely still has a lot of, at least a couple more years of being an elite level player, especially with the way he plays. I feel like moving him, and yeah, I feel like you should have moved him last year and got value. They are slowly losing the value of their assets day by day, month by month. And now next season, or when you get to the offseason, you're going to be like, well, fuck. Like, we just lost DeMar DeRozan for nothing. What's Nikola Vucevic's value at this point? Because a year ago, would have been pretty solid. Same with DeMar DeRozan. LaVine's value a couple years ago, pretty good. And then I hear all this talk about offering Alex Caruso the market for him. I'm like, you got 2 first-round picks on the table for Alex Caruso for a team that kind of needs to build through the draft? I understand Alex Caruso is a very impactful NBA player. I understand that. They are treating Alex Caruso like he's an all-NBA first-team caliber player. When I'm looking at some of the market price that they're putting on an Alex Caruso, I'm like, I understand that. I understand why they're putting him there, but we got to get realistic. We have to. You could have been had cashed in on Alex Caruso. You could have been cashed in on DeMar DeRozan. You could have been in your full rebuild right now. You saw how Kobe White's hooping right now when he gets the opportunity. Obviously, that helps because Zach LaVine's hurt. Kobe White steps into that role. So it's like, what are you waiting on, Chicago? Are you just waiting for your assets to just bottom out? Bojan Bogdanovic last year was worth 2 first-round picks, maybe 3. And now look at him. You picked up some couple young players from the Pistons, but you ain't got 3 first-round picks that you would have got out of him last year because you were being stingy. Because you know teams wanted Bogdanovic. For Chicago, there's teams that want your players. You're just being stingy, and as a fan, and I feel like they're doing from an organizational standpoint, they're looking at their players and putting them on a higher pedestal than what they really are. It's time to go into the rebuild mode, Chicago. It's been time to go into the rebuild. You could have had this rebuild started, fleshed out a whole year ago. Could have had all this sorted out. But I feel like now their assets are slowly deteriorating and getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And now you're going to get to the offseason and you're going to have nothing to really show for it. Now you're going to have to be selling people off for pennies on the dollar because now you want to start your rebuild when it should have been started whole year prior. Next team I do got Sacramento Kings. Well, I'm looking at this team. There's this team that needs to make a move. They're bouncing around in the middle of the Western Conference in terms of the playoff picture, somewhere between the 5 and the 8 seed, just because that's how close it is. But when I'm looking at the Kings, I'm looking at last year, right? You lose to Golden State in the first round. 7 games, defending champs, right? That's a positive season for Sacramento. But these teams that kind of finally break through the glass and get to the playoffs and like are starting to be good and have a young core and a future and all this and that, at what point does it start to get like they plateau? Like, at what point do you're like, okay, this team needs to take the next step? This is a team where I'm like, okay, what's the next step for the Kings? Is it Keegan Murray's development? Or is it a trade of some kind? Because I feel like they've kind of sat on their hands the past couple of, at least just this offseason and this deadline for sure. Because I feel like they sat on their hands with Kyle Kuzma. He went back to Washington. I feel like Kyle Kuzma would have fit perfectly with what they want to do because he can do a little bit of everything. And then kind of sat on your hands with Pascal Siakam thing. I'll give them a pass for that because he's not on a longer deal. And you don't know if you can retain him and bring him back. But for a smaller market team like Indiana, they swung for the fences. A team in kind of the same predicament you are, just in a different conference. They swung for the fences, knowing that they're not a big market that's going to attract that guy that's going to bring them to the next level. Let's get Siakam in here. Let's show him what we about. Hopefully, we were confident that he will like what he sees, and we'll sign him long term. That's what Indiana did. I feel like Sacramento could have did the same thing. I feel like they could have did the same exact thing with Pascal Siakam, easily. So they sit on their hands with that, and I'm like, when you're looking at who they can match up with in the West, you're like, them, Clippers, probably comfortably taking the Clippers. You're like, them, Denver, probably taking Denver. Them, OKC, that's interesting. Like, say you get into a world where, like, you play the Lakers. Lakers can beat you. Like, Golden State. Say you match up, play Golden State or, like, the Pelicans or one of these teams in the play-in. That's a tough match. I don't know, like, what they're... Like, and even Minnesota. I'm probably taking Minnesota. Like, they're so weird because they're good, but they're not as good as the teams around them, I feel like. Because I feel like they're lacking that guy that can take them to the next level. I'm not talking like a superstar, all-star, like, level guy, but I'm like, I would have liked to see them do something. With all the assets they do have, I would have liked to see them go out and experiment with somebody. Like, because you're in a spot where you're already good, but you're not elite level good. So it's like, you're in a weird spot. Because I feel like the teams around you are just a step above you. Like, if I'm looking at a Kings-Pelicans series, I'm leaning Pelicans. I feel like they could have definitely went and added some more defense. I do have them hopefully trying to pick up like a guy like Marcus Morris out of the buyout market. Who knows how that's going to impact their team if it is at all. But Sacramento, I feel like they've kind of sat on their hands and kind of let some of these opportunities slip right through their fingers. Because they're a team that is on the border of kind of getting to that elite level. because of how good Sabonis and Fox are. But then you look at how aggressive teams are that kind of were in that same mold with Sacramento. Like I just brought up the Pacers. Look at New York. Look at New York. I mean, the team that was really in the same spot as Sacramento, they were good, but they weren't elite. Now you're looking at them like, damn, they're elite because they were aggressive. I think Sacramento is just getting to the point where they're okay with being good. Let's be aggressive. Let's get to the next level. That's why I thought they were going to do this offseason, but then they just signed back their guys and Harrison Barnes, which is fine. I think that is a good thing to do. But then it's like, when there's stars out there where you're like, ooh, look good in Sacramento, they kind of sat on their hands with it. Like the Siakam thing, I can say that it was scary. You got to take a risk like Indiana's doing. You have to. Because you're a smaller market. It's not like you're going to get a Paul George who's going to be a free agent soon. You're not like Paul George is going to come there. I mean, knock on wood if he does. But like you got to take swings for the fence and you got to take chances like that in terms of getting guys and taking that next step. Last team I have to kind of wrap up the episode, Lakers. Where do I even start with this one? Because all morning it was like a meme of Lakers do something, Lakers need to do this, and this. We can got to trade for this. That's kind of what the Lakers media is. But I think this is the first sign of this team, like, we got to think about life without LeBron. We got to think of a world where LeBron just isn't on our roster anymore. A world where AD just isn't on our roster anymore. And giving up all your future first-round picks and whatever you had to give up for, bet you probably would have gotten is DeJounte Murray. Does DeJounte Murray make you beat the Nuggets? Does DeJounte Murray make you be able to beat, like, the Clippers in the 7-game series? I don't know. I feel like this is the first sign that I've seen from the Lakers not going like all in like they pretty much do every deadline. They can get people in the buyout market, but it's not going to hinder their future and what they want to do long-term post-LeBron. There's a world where LeBron ain't on this team next year. There is. If I know he loves to be in LA. There's a world where he's like, oh, we're not trying to win anymore? Let me go try to get one more with so-and-so team. Like, they need to start thinking about life after the LeBron era. This is the first time I've seen them do that with making really no move at the deadline. And really, it sucks because I kind of just said, like, what move was there to make? Because they didn't really have the most assets. But this is LA. Like, this is a team who's year in, year out, kind of small retools at the deadline to go make a playoff run. And they kind of sat on their hands, didn't do anything else. This tells me that they're trying to think, and they're starting to think, life without LeBron. Life after LeBron and AD. What's that looking like? What's that era looking like? We're not going to tank all of our pieces for DeJounte Murray, and then all of a sudden it doesn't work, and we get bounced in the first round anyways. I think this conversations that where you need to kind of think about, especially with a team like the Lakers who kind of, like I said, retool at the deadline every year, seems like, to go make a playoff push. But now, this is the first sign to where they're realizing the light at the end of the tunnel. They see that even with whatever move we make, we're not really legit title contenders this year. And they're starting to think about the future, which I'm mad at them for. Because, like I said, there's a world where LeBron James ain't on your roster next year. There is. There just is. And it's crazy for a team like this. They've already won a chip with LeBron in the LeBron era. So, I mean, if I'm them, hey, Brian, it's been fun. It's been fun. Been great. Won a chip. AD, been fun. We're looking at the next phase after y'all. It's time to start thinking about that. Because we've gone all in at the deadline and gave up assets after assets after assets to try to compete for another chip. We got to start thinking about ourselves after y'all. And I think it's time. It's a conversation that needed to be had. This deadline kind of shows to me what they're looking at. Obviously, it's always going to be talks about them picking up a third All-Star. I think that day is done. I think that era is done of super teams. I think you got to start building through the draft. I think the LA is starting to see that light at the end of the tunnel. But this kind of shows to me what they're kind of viewing their team as this season. But trade deadline was fun. Kind of a couple players I thought would get moved but didn't get moved. But like I said, sometimes there just isn't a move to be made. But That's all I got for you guys on this episode of Let's Talk About It. Thank you guys for tuning into the Barrel Talk podcast. Hope to see you tuning into future episodes.